Okay, what I wanted to do today is do some Haftorah study as opposed to Torah study, because this Shabbat is Rosh Hashanah, so we depart from our usual weekly cycle of Torah readings and have special Torah readings for Shabbat and Sunday, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So you'll find the Haftorah for Rosh Hashanah in the Eitz Chaim, what we usually use. If you turn to the back to page 1225, you'll find the Haftarah for the first day of Rosh Hashanah. If you have the Hertz Chumash, it should be there in the back as well. Just look in the table of contents for Haftarah for first day Rosh Hashanah. Or if you have the Machzor, you could look in the Machzor, find the Torah service for first day Rosh Hashanah, and you'll find the Haftorah there as well. I don't have the Machzor handy to me right here. I just thought it would be easier. We always use the Eitz Chaim or the Hertz, and it's readily available in there. Okay? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So we'll read through the Haftarah. I'll read in Hebrew and translate as we go. You can follow along with the English translation, and we'll talk about why the Haftarah, why this section was chosen of all sections of the prophets for the Haftarah for Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so it is the first chapter of the book of Samuel. So there are two books of Samuel. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 1. Vayehi ish echad min haramatayim, Sofim mehar Ephraim, Ushemo Elkanah ben Yeroham, ben Elihu, ben Tohu, ben Suf, Ephrati. So there was a man from Ramatayim of the Tsufites from Mount Ephraim. We were just reading in Bible class on Fridays in the book of Joshua, the territory that was allotted to Ephraim, kind of north of Jerusalem, northwest of Jericho. So Mount Ephraim, who knows where Mount Ephraim is? So there was this man from this place, from this family. His name was Elkanah, son of Yeroham, who was the son of Elihu, who was the son of Tohu, who was the son of Suf from Ephraim, or from Ephrat, Ephrati, it says. So it's translated he's an Ephraimite, but it could also mean he's from Ephrat. Doesn't matter. Velo shtei nashim. So he had two wives, Shem achat Chana, v'Shem hashenit Penina. One was Chana, one was Penina. Good Jewish names. Vayehi li Penina yeladim. Penina had children. Ulachana ein yeladim. Chana was childless. Okay, so just an aside. This is one in a series of stories of barren women. Okay, so we're familiar with Sarah, wife of Abraham, being barren. We're familiar with Rebecca, wife of Isaac, being barren. We're familiar with Rachel, wife of Jacob, being barren. And there are many other stories. In the book of book of Judges, Samson's mother was barren. So there are a number of barren women stories, and all of them have something to do with how they became fertile. And their miraculous fertility is a little bit different within each story. There could be prayer involved, there could be promise involved, there could be sacrifice involved. And in some of these stories, there's a rival wife as well, where the rival wife is the fertile one, but the rival wife is not necessarily the loved one. Okay, so for example, Jacob falls in love with Rachel, right? So he loves Rachel, but is tricked into marrying Leah. Leah is the fertile one. Rachel is not, right? And so that it takes a while for Rachel to be relieved of her infertility and to give birth to Joseph and to die in childbirth with Benjamin. Okay, so this is a what they call a leitmotif, a literary device in the Bible. Barren women, how do they get relieved of their infertility? Okay, so verse 3. So we don't know about Penina and Hannah's relationship with Elkanah. We don't know if one is more loved than the other. We just know that Hannah is barren, Penina is not. Okay? Ve'alaha ishahu me'iro miyamim yamima lehishtachavot ve'lizboach ladonai tzavaot b'shilo v'sham shnei v'nei Eli Chofni Ufinchas Kohanim Ladonai. Okay, so that man, why didn't they say Elkanah? But that man would go up from his city, that is from Ramatayim, every now and then. It says every year. Miyamim Yamima could be translated every now and then. Okay, to bow down and to sacrifice to God, the God of hosts, or the Lord of hosts. Adonai Tzavaot is one way to refer to God, the Lord of hosts, in Shiloh. Okay, why in Shiloh, not Jerusalem? Jerusalem wasn't part of the land of Israel yet. It was Jebusite territory. The temple wasn't built yet. So the tabernacle, the desert tabernacle, was brought into Israel, and it ended up in Shiloh, so which is in Palestinian territory today, within what is known as the territory of Shomron, the northern kingdom, of what would become the northern kingdom of Israel. So he would go there because that's where everybody went. That's where the tabernacle was. So he would go every now and then to worship, to sacrifice to God. And there were two sons of Eli. Eli was the high priest, and his two sons, Chofni and Pinchas, were Kohanim there to God. Okay, so they were the main Kohanim. All right, so verse 4, Vayehi Hayom, so one of these days came about, Vayizbach Elkanah venatan lifnina ishto ulachol baneha uvenoteha manot. So Elkanah would offer the sacrifice, and he gave to Penina, his wife, and to all his sons and daughters portions from that sacrifice. Ulachana yitain mana achat apayim, ki et chana ahev, va'adonai sagar rachma. But to Hannah, he would only give one portion because Hannah he loved, and God had closed her womb. Okay? So vechi asata sarata gam kaas ba'avur hare'ima ki sagar Adonai ba'ad rachma. And her rival, that is Penina, that is the rival wife, that's just what it's called. It's not necessarily, rival just has a connotation that they're vying for things, which turns out to be the case. It just is the word for a co-wife. Okay? So the co-wife would anger her, extra anger, because to taunt her that God had closed her womb. Okay, so Penina didn't make life bearable. Like you would think, well, that Hannah and Penina are not related to each other. They are related to each other by marriage to the husband that they share. So you would imagine that these co-wives would not be necessarily sympathetic to one another. They would like to, each one would like to have a favored status by the husband. And they would do things to the other co-wife, maybe, to make life a little bit more difficult. So Hannah's life is already difficult. She's not fertile, which jeopardizes her position with Elkanah, right? She could be divorced because she's not providing children to him. So her life is already bad, and Penina's making it more miserable because she's taunting her about her infertility. Okay? So already she has favored status because she has children. She's making it, she's flaunting her favored status in the way that she's treating, in the way that Penina is treating Hannah. Okay? So verse 7, V'chein ya'aseh shana b'shana midei alota b'veit Adonai kein tach isena v'ativkeh v'lo tochal. And this is what he would do, that is, Elkanah would do this year after year, every time every time she would go up to the house of God, she would make her angry, and she would cry and not eat. That is, not eat her portion. So in other words, Elkanah would go, he'd bring his whole family with them, and while there, after sacrificing, everybody's eating their portions, Hannah wouldn't be eating her portion because she's miserable, because it's further flaunted and it's thrown in her face that she is without child. Okay? Verse 8. Vayomer la Elkanah isha, Hannah, lame tivki, v'lame lo tochli, v'lame yera levavech, halo anochi tov lach me'asara banim. So this is Elkanah, kind of like the clueless husband, not knowing what's going on in the household, like the gossip and everything that's happening in the household, he could care less about. So, but he notices. So Elkanah says to her, to his wife. Elkanah says to his wife, Hannah, why are you crying? And why aren't you eating? And why is your heart sad or bad? Why do you feel bad? Aren't I good enough for you from better than 10 sons? So, husbands often don't know what to say to their wives, and don't know what the right thing to say is. And perhaps Elkanah is trying to say the right thing to Hannah. Aren't I better than 10 sons? Perhaps he's just rubbing it in even more, reminding Hannah she doesn't have any children. So in an attempt to try to make her feel better, perhaps he's making her feel worse, right? So those husbands here on Zoom today, and those husbands who are watching the recording, can commiserate with Elkanah as trying to say the right thing, and perhaps having it be the wrong thing to say, not realizing that it's the wrong thing to say. Okay, so I'm just filling in the gaps here. Okay, verse 9. Vatakom Chana acharei ochla v'shilo va'acharei shato, ve'eli hakohen yoshev al hakisei al mezuzat hechal Adonai. So Hannah got up after she ate in Shiloh. Now, remember, we just heard that she wouldn't eat because of how she was feeling, but now she's eating, so maybe Elkanah did make her feel better. So after she ate in Shiloh and after she drank, and Eli the Kohen was sitting on the chair, or on a throne, a chair, a throne, the high priest chair, on the doorpost of the house of God, or the temple of God. Okay, so he's sitting at the mezuzah at the entranceway to the Mishkan in Shiloh. Vehi, verse 10, marat nafesh, vatipalel al Adonai uvacho tivke. And she was feeling poorly. Marat nafesh would be bitter of soul. What is this? In her wretchedness. That's how the Eitz Chaim is translating it. It's her bitterness of body, or in modern Hebrew, for how nefesh is translated, bitterness of soul. So her spirit is bitter, and she prayed to God. So the Hebrew says she prayed on God. And so it's unusual Hebrew here. She prayed to God and she cried a lot. So the repeating of uvacho tivke means that she cried a lot. She was weeping. She was bitter of spirit as she was praying to God. Okay? So now we don't have examples of this in the Bible to this point, of people praying to God and expressing their bitterness of spirit as they're praying to God. We have Moses imploring God and asking God to forgive the people of Israel, but we don't have a description of people praying to God being bitter of spirit. We have people offering sacrifices, but we don't have people praying to God and being bitter of spirit while they're praying. Moses prays to God several times on Mount Sinai, surrounding the golden calf, when the people were punished at the incident of the report of the spies, when his sister Miriam was afflicted with leprosy. These are moments that the Torah tells us Moses prayed to God, but there's no bitterness of spirit there. And those prayers were unique, right? The way that people would worship God, communicate with God, would be through sacrifice. So I'm just pointing out that what Hannah is doing here is unique. She's also a woman. We don't have examples until this point of women praying to God, right? Isaac prays on Rebekah's behalf to relieve Rebekah of her infertility. But there are no other women to this point praying to God.
Not Leah.
Leah doesn't. Leah thanks God for the children that she's had so far. Is Rachel praying to God? Maybe. Okay, so it's possible she's imploring God, but there's no. It's not in a formal way, right? There's no example of a woman going to the house of God to pray to God until Hannah. Okay. So
maybe I'm thinking of a midrash with Leah and more about not being loved, but I'm not sure.
That is yes.
Or not feeling loved.
In the Torah, she does complain about not being loved, but she's not complaining to God about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if she is complaining to God about it, she's not going to any altar, place where there is an altar to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So verse 11, Vatidur neder vatamar Adonai tzavaot, imraot tir'eh ba'oni amatecha, uzachartani velo tishkach et amatecha, venatata la'amatcha zera anashim, unetativ la'Adonai kol yemei chayav, umora lo ya'aleh al rosho. So Hannah's desperate and takes an oath. She makes a vow that Adonai Tzavaot. So this is how she was referring, and Elkanah was referring to God as Adonai Tzavaot. Now, Adonai Tzavaot is not a term for God that we find in the Torah. So where does the term Adonai Tzavaot come from? Not sure. It's interesting that it's here, but we don't have Adonai Tzavaot in the Torah. So, but that's the term that Elkanah uses, and this is the term that Hannah is using because she heard her husband refer to God this way. So she says, Adonai Tzavaot, Lord of hosts. If you really see the suffering of your servant, right? This Amma and Amma, Aleph Mem He, is the feminine equivalent of Eved. And Eved is a servant in the masculine, and Amma is a maid servant for the feminine. So your servant, if you see the suffering of your servant and would remember me, and don't forget your maidservant, and give to your maidservant a male descendant, all right, a male child. If you do this, if you give me a male child, if you see my suffering and give me a male child to relieve my suffering, then I will give him to Adonai and would offer him to Adonai all the days of his life, and a blade would not come up to his head. That, in other words, I won't cut his hair, and he'll never cut his hair. All right, so that we know about cutting hair in terms of being a Nazirite. So a person can take a Nazirite vow for at least 30 days. That's the minimum period. But it could be much longer than that if they want to. And one of the conditions of being a Nazirite, well, the conditions are not to consume any grape products by eating or drinking, and not to shave your hair, whether it's the hair of your head or any other hair on your body. You have to let your hair grow. All right, so Samuel could not allow his hair to be cut. Well, that's the future. I'm not giving anything away. We know that Hannah is going to give birth to a child. Okay, we've read this Haftorah over and over again. So the promise is that Samuel, if Samuel were to be born, if she has a child, the child, male child, would be a Nazirite his whole life. Okay, just like Samson in the book of Judges, the promise would be that Samson would be that the woman, the unnamed woman in that story, would be relieved of her infertility, and that she needs to, during her pregnancy, be a Nazirite, and then the child born would need to be a Nazirite his whole life. And that's his hair, Samson's hair, what gives him his superhuman strength, right? And when Delilah cuts it off, that's when all his power goes away, and he's chained to the pillars of the temple in Gaza. And then Samson prays to God, give me my strength back one last time so that I can destroy this temple. He gets his strength. He's able to push the pillars aside with this superhuman strength, and all the people in the temple, the Philistine temple, die. Okay, so the power of infertile woman being relieved of her infertility on condition that either she become a Nazirite or the child be a Nazirite for the rest of their lives. So this isn't the first time for this, because we have Samson in the book of Judges before this, so there is precedent for that. But she's the one here saying, right, the story of Samson, the angel says to the woman that what she has to do and what the boy will have to do. Here, Hannah is the one suggesting that that the child, if she's blessed with a child, that he will be a Nazirite his whole life. Okay, so that the Details of the story are the same, but how it comes about is a little bit different. Verse 12. V'haya ki hirbata lehitpalel lifnei Adonai ve'eli shomer et piha. So so it came to be while she was uh, uh, going on in her prayer, right? It kept on praying before God. And Eli was watching her mouth. Keeping tabs on her. It's interesting. It's not doesn't just say he was looking at her mouth. It says shomer et piha. He's guarding her mouth. What does that mean? That he's guarding her mouth? So there's no commentary on it about this. It's just an unusual phrasing for this. What does it mean that he's guarding her mouth? But let's see. Verse 13, V'chana hi medaberet al liba, rak sifateha naot, vekola lo yishamea, vayachsheveha Eli l'shikora. So Hannah was speaking to herself. Okay, so she was talking to herself. Only her lips were moving. All right, so you couldn't and you couldn't hear her voice. Okay, so that's describing what the situation is. As Hannah's praying to God, it's an internal prayer, but her lips are moving. Okay, no voice emanating from her mouth. And so what does Eli think? Eli thought that she was a drunk. Okay, so maybe drunk people who are drunk talk to themselves like this, but if they're talking to themselves, you can usually hear them talking to themselves. Here with Hannah, you couldn't hear anything. Her lips were just moving, but nothing coming out. So Eli, the high priest, thinks that she's drunk. So 14, Vayomer Eleha Eli, Ad matai tishtakarin, hasiri et yenech me'alayich. Eli says to her, how long have you been drunk for? Get rid of this wine from you. In other words, how dare you be drunk talking to God or be in the presence of God here? It's wrong. Now go away until you sober up. 15. V'ta'an Chana v'tomer lo Adoni, isha kishat ruach anochi, v'yayin v'shechar lo shatiti, v'ashpochet nafshi lifnei Adonai. There's a beautiful statement there, that last phrase. Hannah answered and said, no, my sir, no, sir, no, my lord. Very respectful. I am a woman whose spirit is hard. So, or it's translated here, I'm an unhappy woman. My spirit is hard. My spirit is challenged. I wanted to try to do a literal translation. Yes, the upshot is that she's an unhappy woman, but we lose something in the translation by fixing that. I am a hard-spirited woman. That is, I've been through a lot. Okay, that's probably what that means. I am a woman who has been through a lot, and wine and other hard liquor I have not drunk. I am spilling my soul, but more technically, in the Bible, I'm spilling out my body before God. Okay, so I'm not drunk. I haven't drunk all this liquid, but my body is spilling like liquid. All right, so I'm not drunk and I'm not desecrating this holy place by being drunk, but rather what is flowing from me is my body in response to, in prayer to God, in response to my difficult emotional state. Okay, so this is as psychological and emotional as the Bible gets. This is it in verse 15 right here. A response that why is Hannah coming to God? Because of her emotional frailty. And she's spilling her soul, she's spilling her body to God. And Hannah thinks that that's appropriate. And Eli who is the religious representative of the people, is one of these, there are no chaplains in the time of the Bible. So his his job as a religious representative is to follow the script and to offer the sacrifice and make sure people who are coming in are following the script as well. And he cannot think outside the box and is dumbfounded by what Hannah is doing. She's not following the script. She's allowing herself to spill out to God, and Eli has no idea how to respond to that and just think that she's drunk. All right, so it's just fascinating. So here's another man. Perhaps Elkanah is not exactly, he's trying to make his wife feel better, and perhaps he succeeds, perhaps not. But aren't I better than 10 than 10 children? Hannah, is that feeling better? Is that rubbing in the pain because she's doesn't have any children at all? Okay, and here's another man, a religious representative, also not getting it, not getting what Hannah's doing. Okay, 16, she goes on talking to Eli. Al titenet amatcha lifnei bat b'liya'al, kemerov sichi v'cha'asi dibarti adhena. Don't give your servant, me, she's referring to herself as in relationship to Eli. Don't give your servant over to worthlessness. Don't think lowly of me, she is saying, because it is from an abundance of anguish and distress that I have spoken thus far. Okay, so distress, chaos, anger. It's so yeah. The English translates it as anguish and distress. I could translate sichi as anguish, kaasi, my anger. That's really the literal translation. Here it's distress, so it kind of tempers that. I like the anger. I'm angry about my condition in life. I am fed up with how Penina treats me. I'm fed up that I'm trying to be a good person, and I am punished with infertility. I am angry, and so I am here in response to my anger and my anguish, spilling my body and my soul to God. And you think I'm drunk? Don't think I'm drunk. Don't think I'm worthless. This is what I'm doing here. So to 18, Vatomer, 17, sorry. Vayan Eli, Vayomer lechi l'shalom, ve'elohei Yisrael yitain et shelatech, asher sha'alt me'imo. So then Eli answered and said, go in peace, and the God of Israel will answer your question that you have asked of him, or the God of Israel will fulfill the request that you have asked of him. Okay, so that's how Eli responds. So Eli could have said, I don't believe you. I still think you're drunk. Get out of here. But give credit to Eli for saying, okay, I hear you. I see what you're doing. Rest assured that God has listened to your prayer. And so, 18, Vatomer, Timtsa shifchatcha chen be'enecha, vatelecha isha ladarka, vatochal ufaneha lo hayula od. Okay, so here the Hebrew is a little bit interesting. She said, Timsa shifchatcha chen be'enecha, may your maid, another word for servant, female servant, may your servant find favor in your eye. That a fancy way of saying thank you. And the woman went on her way and she ate. So like she was satisfied, she was pleased with this response from Eli. So she felt like she could eat. Ufaneha lo hayula od. She didn't have her face anymore. That's literally what that means. What is that? So that's why we need the English translation. She wasn't distressed anymore. She wasn't downcast. She didn't have a low self-esteem. Her face wasn't downtrodden. So that's what that means. She was lifted up because of Eli's response and also spilling her soul, affirmation that she would be listened to. 19, Vayashkimu vaboker, vayishtachavu lifnei Adonai, vayashuvu vayavohu el beitam haramata. So they got up in the morning and they bowed down before God. Who's they? It's all Hannah now. So did Hannah tell Elkanah what happened? And that's why it's they now? So it doesn't say. So it's just interesting that it goes to the plural. Instead of talking about what Hannah's doing, it's talking about what they are doing. So is it Hannah and Elkanah? Is it Hannah, Elkanah, and Peninnah? We don't know who the they are, but they got up in the morning early. They bowed down before God, and they returned and came to their home in Ramata, in Ramah or Ramatayim. Vayeda Elkanah et Hannah ishto, vayizkareha Adonai. And Elkanah knew Hannah, his wife, the euphemism that the Bible uses for intimacy, and God remembered her. Okay, so verse 20, Vayehi litekufot hayamim. As the seasons went by, Vatahar Hannah, Vateled Bain. Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. Vatikra et shemo Shemuel, Kime Adonai she'iltiv. And she called his name Shmuel because I asked of him from God. So Shemuel, so El is God. Shemu, it would be more likely that it means God heard, as in Yishmael, right? So the name Yishmael would have an ayin there and a yud. So that's definitely God heard. Shemuel, Hannah says, God answered or answered the request. All right, so maybe play with that a little bit. Okay. 21, Vaya'al ha'ish Elkanah, v'chol beito lizboach l'Adonai et zevach hayamim ve'et nidro. So then Elkanah, the man, and all his household went up to sacrifice to God, the annual sacrifice, and his votive sacrifice, his oath. Right, and what oath did he make? But perhaps the oath that she made becomes his oath. We know in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, when a wife makes a vow, the husband has to confirm the vow. She can't make a vow on her own. The husband has to corroborate it. So it becomes his vow. So perhaps that's what this means. His vow, there was no vow that he had made. It's a vow that she had made. So perhaps she told Elkanah the vow that she made. Elkanah agreed with it, so then it becomes his vow. Okay. 22, V'chana lo alata, ki amra le'isha ad yigamel hana'ar v'haviotiv, v'nir'a et pnei Adonai, v'yashav sham ad olam. Hannah did not go up, because she said to her husband, until the boy is weaned, then I'll bring him, and he'll see the face of God, and he'll stay there forever. Right? That's the promise that she had made, that she would give him to God forever. We read that later in the book of Samuel. It's not part of the Haftorah. 23, Vayomer la Elkanah isha, asi hatov be'enayich, shavi ad gam lechoto, ach yakem Adonai et devaro, vateshev ha'isha vatenek et bana ad gam la oto. And Elkanah said to her, her husband said to her, Do what's good in your eyes. Yes, that sounds good. Stay here until you wean him. But uh, uh, but may God fulfill his word. And the woman stayed and nursed her son until she weaned him. 24, Vata'alehu ima ka'asher gimalatu befarim shlosha ve'efa achat kamach v'nevel yayin v'teviehu beit Adonai Shiloh v'nahana'ar na'ar. So then she went up with him when she weaned him with three three bulls, and an ephah of kamach, this measure of flour, and a measure of wine, a jar of wine, and she brought him to the house of God in Shiloh, and the boy was a boy. He's still young. He was just weaned, maybe 2-3 years old. Vayishchatu et apar, vayaviu et anar el Eli. So they slaughtered the bull, which should mean they slaughtered all the bulls because she brought 3 of them. They slaughtered the bull and they brought the boy to Eli. Right, if you're going to bring the boy to God, well, God's emissary on earth in this case is Eli, the high priest. Vatomer bi Adoni, chei nafshecha Adoni, ani ha'isha hanitzevet imcha bazeh lahipalel Adonai. So 26, she said, please, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who stood with you here to pray to God. So she's reminding Eli who she was. I was here a year ago. Remember me. El hana'ar hazeh palalti. Vayitein Adonai li et she'elati asher sha'alti me'imo. It's this boy about whom I prayed. And God answered my prayer. And I prayed. And God answered my prayer, which I had asked of him. V'gam anochi hishieltihu la'Adonai kol hayamim asher hayahu sha'ul Adonai vayishtachu sham la'Adonai. And in turn, I loan him to God all his life. He will be loaned to God, and they bowed down there to God. Okay, so this is the story of Hannah and her prayer to God and how God fulfilled the prayer. So now the Haftorah ends with a further prayer of Hannah to God. But I just want to say until this point that the story, why this story is here on Rosh Hashanah. So the simplest answer is to encourage everyone who comes to shul on Rosh Hashanah that don't think that our prayers are going to go unanswered. Remember this story and how Hannah, who was distressed, who felt like she was never listened to, who felt like she was cursed and punished, her prayer was answered. Why was it answered? Because she prayed with sincerity. She spilled her body and soul to God. Okay, so in the most profound spiritual way, if we're willing to spill out our guts to God on Rosh Hashanah, if we literally approach prayer in that way, then the potential is there for our prayer to be answered this Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so I think that is the main reason that this Haftorah, that this section was chosen as the Haftorah, right? It's the idea of baring our souls to God, doing so with sincerity. And it might seem trite, it might seem corny, but for the rabbis, it is a very, very serious process. And this is what we need to be doing this year and every year as we approach the idea of repentance and we approach God. Okay? Now, the other things about this that we learn are how incredible it is that we learn about prayer from a woman. And there are many things that the rabbis learn from Hannah in terms of how we are supposed to pray. Okay? That we're supposed to pray by having our lips move, right? The rabbis say in the Mishnah, the Talmud, and throughout all the ages that the best form of prayer is to have our lips move while we're praying, right? It's not enough to be thinking about it inside our head. We have to have our lips move as we're doing it, okay? And that's one of the lessons we learn from Hannah here. We don't have time to look at the entire 10 lines here of chapter 2 of the prayer itself, but it's a beautiful prayer, and I encourage you to look at the English translation when we get to this Haftorah on the first day. But yes, questions and comments. Gabe.
If we're supposed to move our lips, then why is the Amidah silent?
Okay, so yes, silent enough. So not only are we supposed to move our lips, we are supposed to, in an undertone, be saying the prayers out loud. So that's the way we're supposed to pray. So in other words, some prayers are done out loud, right? Like we sing the Shema out loud, we're singing the Torah service out loud, we're singing the Amidah out loud when it's repeated. All of those things we sing out loud, but when we say the Amidah silently, it should be Baruch Atah Adonai. So it's a whisper. So loud enough for us to hear, but not too loud that we're bothering the person next to us. So that's what we are supposed to do. I frankly have never gotten in the habit of doing that. I went to Jewish day school all my life, and we never prayed like that. So I never got into the habit, even though I know the halacha about it. I just never got into the habit of praying like that. Okay? I don't even have my lips move when I'm praying. So I am praying internally, and it's not wrong, obviously, to pray in that way. It's just that the rabbis suggested that we pray this way, the way that Hannah did, by whispering and having our lips move. And so, yes, that's silent relative to the out loud prayers that we do. Any other thoughts or comments? Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, same comment this year I made last year to you. We say the abridged version of this Haftorah. And
actually not this year. I told Stan we can do the whole Haftorah because we're skipping some things in the service on Shabbat because it's Shabbat, right? We're not blowing the shofar. That saves 10 minutes right there, and we don't blow the shofar and repetition and all that. So I think we have time for the whole Haftorah, and Stan's ready to do the whole Haftorah.
Yeah, but last year you stopped at the end of verse 19.
That's right.
And I said, but the verse 20, it mentions the birth of Samuel.
Right. So
one more verse would make a lot more sense.
Yeah. Right. I don't know. It's interesting.
Samuel.
Right. The Harlow Machzor, as it's called, the gray one that we used to use before the Machzor Lev Shalem, offers verse 19 as a stopping point, as opposed to verse 20. So I think the idea, and God remembered her, so ending that way, that God remembered her, is a more fitting way to stop than because she asked him from God. So I don't know. It's how Jules Harlow, the editor of the Machzor, Rabbi Jules Harlow, decided that verse 19 was a more appropriate place to stop than verse 20. Okay. Yeah, and another place to possibly end was at the end of chapter 1. So that's another possible stopping point that's in the Harlow Machzor.
Mhm.
So, any other thoughts or comments about the Haftarah? So again, I just wanted to point out it's beautiful, it's ancient, and that the ancient words still had this beautiful psychology and emotion expressed about pouring out her soul and body to God. That just it's very, very poignant. And just want to wish everybody a Shana Tova, a happy and a healthy New Year. Next Wednesday we will meet, and Shabbos, the following Shabbos is a regular Shabbos, and so we'll study the Torah portion of the week Ha'azinu next week. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care, and hopefully we'll see you in shul. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Okay. Shabbat to everybody.